everyone. My name is Andre Bright, your burnout prevention coach, and I'm about to talk about everything to do with stress, resilience, and burnout principles so you can continue to grow without burning out too.
Welcome to yet another exciting episode of the Online Prosperity Show, your number one spot for scenes, ideas, methods, and solutions that can truly transform your world. I'm your host, Prosper Taruvinga, and I'm really excited for our next guest today. Now, say, Andre, bonjour.
Yes, sir. Bonjour, sir. Ça va? That's about as all I got.
I think we then go, ça va bien, très bien, merci. Vous? Yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
That's exactly right. I love it when, somebody's name means something or is something, and then, you go into it and then they obviously would have to explain themselves after that. That's the best part. But thank you so much for joining us on the Online Prosperity Show today. Now, for those that are tuning in, of course, don't touch that dial. This is not the French channel, even though we tried and butchered it there. I think the French will be very, very angry at us. Please don't go and protest or burn things on the streets. I've seen the French people do that every now and again. Today's guest is Andre Bright, the brains behind Your Burnout Coach Ltd. And he's the go-to for high-achieving leaders who are trying to, start, scale, and grow, or are running on empty and desperate for sustainable performance without burning out. And what pain does he fix? Have you ever felt like the weight of expectations, either from above or below, has you just teetering on the edge of burnout? I know burnout has been somewhat of a buzzword, but so many of us are going at it, and half of the time we do not quite realize what's going on. So Andre helps you not only stay upright, but so without sacrificing your well-being, because basically you can't do well if you're not feeling well. And there's a fun fact here. Before he actually became a burnout, should I call it a burnout slayer? He was actually an architect and a dancer. And obviously that whole slaying comes in to that dance part. Yes. So he literally designs with precision and moves with rhythm. And that's the one person, that we have in front of us today. So today we're going to be unpacking how that unique combo really powers his coaching and what it can teach us about structure, creativity, and also resilience. So stick around, because I think by the end of this episode, you're going to be able to hear not just a story, but you're going to be able to feel like you're just right here with us, living this particular episode, and also breathing, maybe for the very first time. Now, Andre, I could go on and talk about things that I'm not even qualified to even talk about. So before burnout became your day job, you were an architect and you were even a dancer. What was life like back then?
First of all, thank you so much for the introduction. I'm going to take that clip and carry it with me everywhere. I think that's that's a great way to describe what I do and who I help. But before now, balancing the architecture and dance was just two very passionate areas of my life that kind of encapsulate who I am, that I didn't want to let go of. Some people say jack of all trades, master of none. So I try to be the master of all trades. So it's some people have like a backup. I think from a Sierra Leonean background, the idea is you're a lawyer, engineer, a doctor, something like that. So that was the architecture side, the more stable sense. But then I also was really passionate about dance. And I remember a day would look like going to work for the 9 to 5 when I was living in London for Reading, for example, and then coming to London and doing training 7 o'clock till 10 o'clock, and then being back around midnight, half midnight. So that would be like an average day. But it was the way I had balance. And it's funny thinking about burnout now, there was a lot of things I did, but I didn't feel burnt out because all the things that I was doing, were giving me energy as opposed to draining me of it, which is something that I focus on right now. Actually, it's not just time management, it's energy management. So that's what my average day used to look like. And then I would also, as a Sierra Leonean, very passionately, I do social impact projects back home. I had a national storytelling festival which I collaborated with, and it was just an opportunity to help young girls find entrepreneurship, creatives turn their art into business, and just anything I could do to get stuck in anywhere. I was doing it all the time. I think for me, the only time it became an issue is when some of those things started to become draining. And that's when the first experience of burnout actually happened.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for taking us through there. So when you were talking Sierra Leone, I was just trying to think, who's a famous singer from Sierra Leone? I had Akon pegged out, but then I then figured out Akon is from Senegal. But at least I got the S
Yeah.
correct, but then the rest didn't match up. So you raised a very interesting subject here, where you are coming from a background that has an expectation for you to either do well and be something or make something of yourself. What was it like growing up? Were your parents like, first generation migrants, or were they also born there?
Yeah, so I mean, I was born there as well. And I mean, both of my parents were quite academic in that sense. My mum, we moved to UK because my mum was doing her PhD in hydrogeology, and my father at the time, well, I think he became like the one of the ambassadors for Sierra Leone. So I mean, in terms of levels, it was quite up there in terms of expectations of whatever I was going to do. But I wouldn't necessarily say I felt that at the time. They were very supportive, but I was actually conscious as I grew up, though, because when we came here is when the Sierra Leonean Civil War started, and went for about 10 years, so we couldn't come back. So what was meant to be a 2 year time here ended up becoming 10 years. And then by the time of that 10 years, I'd spent more time here than I had in Sierra Leone. So I became more British. And then at that point, I think the shift happened is I realized my compassionate side is understanding the parents' generation, where when they tell us to do architecture, lawyer, or that kind of stuff, it's really just because they want us to be safe. They know they've noticed that these are the type of occupations that bring stability, and they want you to be stable. So I acknowledged that. So went into architecture. But I think for me, my question then is how to make these other types sustainable as well, which is why when I did dance, I was doing the tours, I was doing the workshops, I was doing the music videos, that kind of thing. And that was lucky, actually, because during the economic crash of 2010, there was no one hiring architects. So then I was dancing, I was going to Miami, I was going to Japan, I was doing all these things which architecture couldn't do. So I think for me, I was fortunate that the background I had with my parents being so academic and the way they thought about things, I was able to apply to both sides of my academic and creative interests.
I can only imagine, because I mean, obviously, if you had already secured the qualification, yeah, you can go and play after you've done your homework. I mean, that has always been, the part of it. And looking at that sort of environment where mom had this aspirational way of being, did that put any pressure on yourself to at least achieve?
Yes and no. I think because it was always that way, it was just our norm within the household.
Right.
So, for example, even with GCSEs, she had a revision timetable for me, which I just did. And it was 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the afternoon, 3 hours in the evening. But then looking back, that's 9 hours of revision at the ages of about 16, which is more than you actually spend in school. And but it was what was required, got my A's, all that kind of stuff. So the results spoke for themselves. But it was just like, so for example, now she does tuition and she does focuses on exam technique.
Mm.
And one of the things that I thought was genius about that, she's not giving you the curriculum, she's teaching you how to answer the questions to get the points.
Yeah.
And I found that mum taught me a lot, not necessarily by teaching me, but just by demonstrating certain things. So now the question I have in my life is what she always used to say, exam technique. She asks me a question and I'm floating around the subject, you say, exam technique, which means get to the point. And applying that in life is how I think I've managed to cut a few corners and get straight to the meat,
Yeah.
and not necessarily take the road that's usually traveled, but risk making my own.
You see, that's the thing about that way of being, because usually life is usually, either or, and when you find yourself having to explain yourself, just like when we started, we try to speak French, but we then went on trying to explain. No, we could have just spoken the language and that would have been it.
Mhm.
So when you find yourself having to explain yourself in life, either you're trying too hard and it's an overreach, or you're just really trying to find some sort of an excuse. And I think exam technique is the way to go, especially when it comes to living life. And I think I
Mhm.
might just take that, because some of us, I could go on and on. Like I said, I need to exam technique myself and things of that nature. So when you finished school and maybe the architecture stuff, you went on and worked for about 10 years, and
Mhm.
this sort of made you realize, nah, this is not the sort of thing for me. What do architects actually do except play with um cardboards and make figurines of houses and showcase them to people? I'm just talking about, the ones that I see in the movies.
Yeah, and I wish it was like that because the thing is now everything's digital, right? Like I remember being in because I did my undergrad in Loughborough Uni, and then I did my master's in Cardiff, and that's when I went into sustainable design. And during those courses is where we did the models. We created a physical model. We put it into the wind machine to see if the forces would keep it up, all those kind of stuff. But then when we went into the actual field, everything's on computer. So unfortunately, we don't have that part. But I was working for a company where it was mainly commercial retail. So your Asda's, your Tesco's, your co-ops, those big sites, basically. So we'd have a team of people who would design. It was mainly up till construction point that I would do my designs. So it was the concept design, it was the detailed design, it was looking at what the flow internally would be as well. So we could make the most of the floor area. And then we'd hand it over to the construction team to build. And there was a good point and bad point about that, thinking about it. The good point is that it meant that we got through a lot of designs. Like I remember through the pandemic, I was really fortunate actually. I was working for that company because a lot of companies completely fell flat. You know, there was a lot of people who lost their jobs, etc. We ramped up during that period because we were working on grocery stores in areas where they may not have had access to food. So we increased the pace to allow for those buildings to be built so that people could eat.
Mm.
So instead of having 2 days to turn around a drawing, we had to turn it around in half a day. So it was a lot more work, but it was very much okay. I'm looking at this location. How will people enter it and exit? What would it look like? How would it feel like when they walk in through the building? What happens if you are in a wheelchair accessible? What is the foot flow? Where's the parking? We think about the entire building, and we'd have to, within that time, come up with a solution that we'd actually submit for it to be approved or not. And then we go to the detailed design for it to be approved or not, put it in for planning applications for it to be approved or not, and then we send it over to the construction team.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you are the guys that are actually responsible for me getting lost all the time in IKEA, right? Have you ever been in a shop like IKEA where there's no straight lines and I just keep going around in circles and I keep seeing the same people? I kind of feel like the people that work in IKEA, they just gave up and they're like, you know what, we might as well just hang around here because it's too difficult to get out of here.
Yeah, we're designed to keep you in there. That's what we're doing.
Absolutely. But also, you touched up on a point where work started piling up. And obviously, you're doing this at a time where everybody else was maybe staying at home and it wasn't that much of a fast-paced sort of environment. So do you think this would not have maybe occurred had the pandemic not happened, or what it was just going to happen at least down the track, maybe not as quickly as the pandemic made it, come out?
Yeah, I think that specific scenario was because of the pandemic. So what you'd usually have is you'd have, if you look at it like a traffic light system, there are certain buildings which are in green, right? So these are the ones which are being pushed through already. They've got the green light for you to go ahead. Certain buildings would be in red because there's huge question marks over them. Will it work practically? Will people be able to use it, etc.? And then there were certain projects which were in what I would call amber. So these are the ones which are kind of ready to go, but they're kind of not a priority. So what ended up happening is instead of just focusing on the green, because of the pandemic and some of the locations where they were, all the things that were amber turned green. So that was why the pressure built up during that period. And to be honest, I'm quite thankful for it because, like I said, I have a lot of friends and family who during that period lost work, whether some people, there were other people who started business in the pandemic and blew up, but many of them, it wasn't such a great time. So for me, I was just thankful at the time that I was able to continue working. And it was a time when, I was at that point where my rhythm was, I'd got my what's it called? My robot mode, as my mom would call it. My exam technique was down pat. So I was able to get the churn going to that rate. But again, I still wasn't burnt out by it because I was conscious of the output. I was thinking about the person on the other side. If we don't get this through, then there's going to be somebody in a community where they can't go out and the nearest shop is going to be too far from them. So the reason why I was able to keep going energy wise was because I was thinking this has a purpose. This period of time where we're ramping up is because of this need. And, going back to the burnout thing, a lot of the time it is because of like, what is your motivation? Like I said, it's not necessarily time management, it's energy management. If we can find purpose in the things we're doing, it can give us the energy to keep going.
Well, absolutely. I mean, everything is energy. I mean, even when you're, just maybe just sitting on a bus, you have to be looking around and making sure you're not going past the place that you're going. So sometimes if you fall asleep, you miss your stop. So you can only imagine if energy is not being exerted in just about everything that you're doing, you definitely would miss your stop. And okay, let's go into exam technique here. Now, you would have, I love it. You can tell that.
I like it. Yeah.
And even mom is going to be like, yeah, I think.
Oh, she's like, yeah, of course, because it works.
Absolutely. So, I mean, while you were doing all of this, some people started looking at you and thinking you're already figured out this energy thing. You're really sort of inspirational and motivational and things like that. What was everybody else? Like you said, everybody else was down and out. Their whole systems were down because of what was happening. Had you been in Melbourne, we were the most locked down city in the whole world. I think 285 days or so. So a lot of people, even if you had hope on day number 2, by day number 15, you're already thinking, nah, I don't think this is gonna. You can imagine. So you know your friends, they would see you go to work, and you were probably helping them out at that particular time. What was happening?
Um, yeah, I mean, do you know what? It was one thing that I was very conscious of during the pandemic is this is a time that's going to go down in history. I remember being very conscious of that because it was so different. It was such a sociological shift that there was no way this isn't like, we read about 1066 and all these things and world wars and stuff. Like there are periods of time which become really significant. And I was very conscious that this is one of them. A lot of people were struggling, like I said. I found that I think because I was in that space, I mean, fortunately, it wasn't like I'll tell you what was a moment where the reality of it was set in was where I was working. We were one of the last people to leave the office, right? And so I was still going into central London. And I remember the day we were like, okay, legally speaking, the lockdown is here now, so we can't come into the office anymore. And so they had to get us Ubers to take our computers and desks and everything to our houses. And I remember that journey because it was the middle of London at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Thursday. The roads should have been heaving with people who were coming on and off their lunch, and there was nobody. It was literally like the movies where you have, a post-apocalyptic thing that has happened and it's a desert, the tumbleweeds are running and you might see a dog or something walk across the street. It was genuinely like that. No buses were running, nothing. And I was just like, this is eerie. And I remember going home and seeing this site and being very conscious of this is history happening. So during the time, I was just trying to be very empathetic. So I was one of the lucky ones who had a job. A lot of my friends were on furlough. A lot of my friends were, financially in a place where they were struggling. If some of those friends had savings, they kind of like managed to keep them going for a while. But there was also this idea that being in that position, the impact it has on your mental health can be very detrimental. So I had a lot of friends who really struggled, and I just tried to be there for them, really, and just to hear what they had to say, the experiences, etc. Step in where I could, but just be a space to talk. And so much so that I actually created a space. We call it, at the time, I had a company called Become Immersive. Become had a forward slash after the B/come. Be as in who you are right now, come as in returning, and become as in who you're going to be. And we had an initiative called Become Talks, and this ran for 2 years, twice a week, 3-hour sessions where it was just a space like this on Zoom where the Black community could just talk and share our experiences and not feel alone. And for me, that was part of my contribution. So 2 years, it was a lot of holding space. Every session we had a different theme. We talked about everything from health, wealth, relationships, culture. And I think that was in a way part of my training to become a coach, because I learned how to ask questions and how to listen and how to hold space for people. And I think in a way it's one of these things where I'm actually not grateful for the pandemic, but there were certain things that came out of it that I'm not sure if I would have gotten if it hadn't have happened. So those were like my slither of silver linings that came out of it for me.
Oh, absolutely. And you see, there's certain things that happen for us. You know what I mean? Had this sort of thing not happened, I mean, you wouldn't have discovered maybe this talent or this skill set. It would maybe have come down the track, but maybe you would have now had maybe 3 or 4 buildings with your name on it, and it would have been too hard for you to too legit to quit, so to speak. You know
as
what I
they
mean?
say.
So
Yeah.
the things like that. Now you say there were 3 friends that then asked if you'd actually considered coaching, and that then
Mm,
really ignited your decision to do that. What was the moment that you actually thought, you know what, I think I'm done with the architecture side of things, and
mm.
this could be the thing that I want to be doing?
Yeah, and I think to tell that story, I'd have to go back a little bit because these friends didn't know each other.
Ooh, okay.
So these were three random friends, because I have many different friendship circles. These are three friendships that don't know each other, but they all happen to be going through some kind of qualification around the similar kind of time. And individually, they came to me, and we were, having conversations about general stuff. And at some point in the conversation, they would say something along the lines of, "Oh, have you ever considered coaching? I'm doing this qualification, and what they're teaching you do naturally, and it might be something you might be interested in." After the first person says it, I'm like, "Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you for thinking of me." The second person is like, "Oh, that's interesting. Someone else said that before." But after the third person says it, you start to pay attention. So it was at that point that I started to look at what coaching really was. Because to be honest with you, I didn't necessarily understand fully. I think my idea of coaching is a bit blended with mentoring, consultancy, therapy, counseling. In my head, it was just in this gourmet of other services. So I did a webinar with the Academy of Executive Coaches, and I absolutely loved it. Absolutely loved it. I thought, wow, I've seen people help people, but to give an example, at that time in the webinar, they asked if there was anyone who would volunteer to be part of a demonstration of what coaching is, right? And I put my hand up because in my head I was like, free coaching, absolutely. So put my hand up, and in that 15 minutes, I got such clarity that ended up actually being the first catalyst for me to start building my own coaching business, because I was just crystal clear in 15 minutes. Bearing in mind, I've had all these questions, these feelings. Do I, don't I? What do I want to do next, etc. And in 15 minutes, everything just fell into place. And I thought, wow, that's incredible. I want to help people to that level. And so I came off that webinar. I went online, I saw the course, and I applied then and there, basically. And it was like a 6-month course. I became qualified with the Academy of Executive Coaches and the International Coaching Federation. And after that, I just started to help people one by one. And I noticed pretty much immediately that the one theme, the one recurring issue that everybody was experiencing was stress in some way, shape, or form. That kept showing itself up. How are we dealing with stress? How does stress show up? How are we able to leave our work at work? Are we able to, shut off when we come home? What are the health issues that are coming up because we're not dealing with stress? All these things started to come up, and I realized I need to look at stress in more depth. And so I started to do a lot more studying, a lot more learning around it, a lot more experimentation, and then after a while, I decided to just lean into it. And so there was a point where I shifted and just became the burnout coach. And then I realized that for me was, I think, probably the most significant um, thing that helped my coaching career was being very specific about who I helped. I help people who are mid managers, like you said at the beginning. They got the pressure from above and I feel like the managers are the MVPs really for a company, because they're the people who help the company run. So they get the pressure from above because there's going to be company deadlines, company deliverables that need to be happening. But then they also get the pressure from below because they have the team dynamics, conflict resolution, performance, all those things. So they get pressure from both sides, but they also have a life outside of work. So at home, they're going to be the leader in their home. They're going to be trying to think about where to go next, all these kind of things. So they get it from 3 areas. And there's just this pressure that happens with them, especially if they're trying to continue to increase, but without burning out. There's a lot of resistance to that. So I gravitated towards that specific niche, that specific issue, and I've just been doing it ever since. So it's been a really awesome journey for me. And then it got to the point where I was like, you know what? I want to actually, I realized for my own personal goals, I wasn't going to get to where I wanted to be doing my 9 to 5 alone. There just wasn't enough room for growth financially or in terms of like career or personal development. If I wanted to be at a stage where I could help people at scale, where I can do my social impact work in Sierra Leone without having to apply for funding, if I wanted to, be able to have a giving budget to the scale that my mom does, all these kind of things, I would need to be able to do something which was on my terms, because it's not just about how much money I was making, it's how much energy I was being able to give. And I felt like if I stayed in architecture the way it was at that point, then I would have drained out and I wouldn't have been able to have the balance that I do now.
Absolutely. And kudos to you, man. So many people, when they get started in these ventures, the allure of safety within a job and the consistency of income coming in. I don't know. What was it like when you sort of now got started? I mean, you spit the dummy, you're like, yeah, no more looking at bricks and mortar and glasses and everything else. I'm now going to go and look at hearts and souls and people, and there would have been that adjustment sort of period. What was that like for you?
One thing I would say, and I would encourage people not to listen to these gurus online who say you just need to get rid of anything, cut off the parachute and just leap out of the plane. That's the worst advice ever. I feel like we have to design a transition. I think best case scenario is you build your company up on the side to the point where it meets or maybe even doubles your income before you get to the point where you're able to step away. And I would even encourage an extra level, which is that you have a runway of contracts already signed that would do you for the next year or so before you get to that stage. I think there's far too many people who take the risk and leap without any kind of safety net at all. And then they end up, because I mean, I can't remember the stats, but it's like 95% of businesses or something don't reach the second year. And part of it is because they don't have that runway, they don't have that system in place, and they don't necessarily, it might be your first time starting a business and you don't actually know how to run one because it's a different skill set, a different mentality to be able to, especially when you're starting at the beginning, you are the entire company. Here's what I say to people. If you want to start your business, you're effectively trading in your 9 to 5 for a 24/7 at the start. Right. That's basically what you're doing. You're trading in your 9 to 5 for a 24/7. Because if you think about it, when you're working for a business, there is a marketing department, there's an acquisition department, there's a sales department, there's a delivery department. You become all of the departments for it to run. Especially if you're doing it for the first time, you're probably doing it alone because you can't afford to hire anyone. One thing I would say, get a co-founder. I have a co-founder now, and I cannot tell you how thankful I am that I don't have to carry the entire company burden on my shoulders. Because as soon as I got a co-founder, things shifted, and the co-founder only happened this year. And that was a learning journey for me. It took me doing coaching for maybe about three years plus, doing it full time pretty much over the last year. And it's only now that I've got a co-founder who we have gone specifically into health and education because those doors are opening because of the need. But it's such that I have my skills that I'm really good at and passionate about. She has her skills that she's really good at and passionate about, which means I don't have to worry about that part. I can just focus on this part, which it naturally comes to me. I'm the person who gets the process going. It's like, okay, there's a need. Let's break this down into a workshop or a deliverable for, okay, you want a 3-month program, we'll deliver it. We'll We got monitoring and evaluation. We can be able to track the progress over the next year to make sure you're reaching your deliverables and be able to prove it works. I'm that person. She's the people person, right? She's the one who is like building that relationship. She'll, take you to coffee and ask you questions about what you need to ask, that emotional intelligence side. Not that I don't have that, but my real skills are turning your problem into a solution and breaking it down into some simple steps. That's my process brain at work, and I do it in a creative way, right? But without a co-founder, I'd have to do everything and stretch myself thin, even if it's something I'm passionate about, and then risk burning out, which is something that I'm really finding. And there's different types of burnout as well. There's the burnout where you've got too much work and you're running too fast, and you've got the other burnout where there's too little and there's nothing left in the tank and nothing's happening and you're demotivated and you've got nothing pushing you to get up in the morning, right? And those things aren't necessarily separate. They can happen one day it's one version, the next day it's another version. And for an individual, they might run through the gamut of different versions of these. And so for me, building the business has been a real eye opener, not just in my own experience, but also being able to help people through theirs. I've been able to recognize myself in them. I've been able to recognize, okay, so this is what was happening. I did a workshop once where I asked people to just describe what burnout looks like to them. One person described it like they're drowning and they're swimming as hard as they can to try and break air and nothing they can do works. Another person described it like a desert. And no matter how far they walk, they never reach water. Both burn out, but completely different ends of the scale. So yeah, that's as a synopsis of what I do and why I'm so passionate about it. I think for me, it's people have an idea about stress, but they don't necessarily understand the control or power or autonomy they have to affect it until they sit down and realize, like one of my approaches is I use appreciative inquiry, which looks at what have you done that works already? Let's do more of that. Because usually what happens is when you're stressed, you stop doing the basic things. You stop eating regularly. You stop keeping yourself hydrated. You stop going to the gym. You stop doing all these things that keep you able to manage the internal stresses so that the stressors seem even bigger. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff I do, but I really love it. And helping people I get that from my mom, as they say.
Absolutely. You see, you know what's really exciting about all of these things that you're talking about is everything has just come full circle. I mean, the way you're living your life is exactly the way you would want other people to also be operating. Because if you are trying to do everything by yourself, I mean, just look at my fingers. No two fingers on the same hand are of the same height. So many people are trying to be everything to everyone, and they become nothing to even themselves. And then eventually they start burning on both ends, and hence the whole burnout scenario. Now, my question is, did burnout just become a new thing, in these days, just because we now have words for things? Or you did mention your mom was doing all of these things while being a mom, while being an academic, while being a wife, and everything else along with that. I don't feel like our parents, or maybe they were masking it well. Did burnout exist in their time, or are we just too soft now?
I love that question. Actually, I'm gonna approach it from two angles. The first angle is that, and I'm a very logical thinker as well as creative, right? There's this what's the way I'm looking at it? This idea of colonizers. They'll show up to a land and say, "This is now West Indies,"
Yeah.
or "This is now Ghana," or "This is now Sierra Leone," as if nothing existed beforehand. All of a sudden, because I'm here now it exists. I think there's an element of when we have studies that finally put a name to something, we start to think, oh, this only started happening then. When actually, if you look at it for what it is and take the name away, you'll probably find patterns of it far, far, far earlier. So, burnout, for example, if you look at burnout as a series of changes of behavior, physical changes, mental changes, emotional changes, you'll probably be able to look through your family history and realize it. At some point, there was something that happened to Auntie at this point where she changed. You know, there's probably something that happened to uncle or granddad when he was in his 20s where he changed. You know, like for example, not to go too grim, but Sierra Leone, we had 10 years of civil war, right? There's a physiological change, there's a mental change, there's an emotional change in the people who were there, who survived, who are carrying things they haven't dealt with that changed them. So they're now dealing with stress completely differently to how they were before. I'll give an example. There was one of my clients was talking about why he doesn't feel himself recently. And we realized, you know, he's lost his energy somewhere along the way. And then we traced it back, like, you know, how long have you been feeling this way? And we realized, okay, it's been for 2 years. What was happening around 2 years ago? Oh, snap, that was because so and so passed away. Or, you know, I changed job and I couldn't find anything else. Or, you know, da 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 da. There was something that triggered it, that changed it. I feel like nowadays we just have a term for a lot of these things that always existed. All these mental health things, anxiety, etc., psychosis, all these things, they didn't just start because some old white man in a lab gave it a name, right? They've actually been there, but we've just seen them as the norm up till that point. Oh, like, so for example, back home, if someone has some kind of a mental health issue back home, we just say, oh, this is not Chris, man. Right? This
Yeah.
is a crazy person, right?
Mm.
And we just accept that, oh, they're crazy. We don't necessarily dive into what it is they're struggling with or where it came from. But there is probably going to be a term that accurately describes what they're experiencing, right?
So
So for me, yeah,
so kind of like if you can't name it, you can't tame it, right? So now
exactly.
we've gotten to a place where we can sit around, maybe we're sipping colder water, you know, and now we're
Mm,
thinking, wait a minute, this water heat's kind of different, but I'm stressed
yeah.
because I'll tell you something, Andre. You know, every day when I'm taking my kids to school, I
Mm,
literally just look at the watch and I'm like, kids, let's get ready. Then they all get ready and we jump into the car.
mm,
Zoom back 20 or so or 30 years ago, dad would have woken up early in the morning, make sure the car is already running, you know, open the thing, make sure that the water is in there, everything is in there. And then he starts the car from in there and then you hear him raving it from the engine. And then now you know you can go to school. You know what I mean? Like, wouldn't
yeah.
that have stressed you knowing that that's your morning routine? Instead, now I don't even need to find my keys. I just need to be near my car and the
Mm,
door automatically magically opens.
mm. And do you know what? Not to turn this into a masterclass on stress, but one of the key things that I found that can help people with stress is how we approach it, is the mental side of things. How are we looking at this challenge in such a way that we can relieve its pressure on us? So, for example, you have a morning routine, right? What people often do is they believe that it's stuck that way, right? So it has to be this way. There's no other way. I've got this to do. One of the things that I help people do is like, okay, what if it looked different? What could that look like? Right? Even just those kind of questions might change it. It's like, oh, actually, I don't have to wake up at 7 o'clock to start the car already. Maybe if I did it the night before, then I wouldn't have to do it that morning. Oh, actually, maybe if I wake them up in a certain order, then it means that they can sort themselves out for breakfast. Like, you know, all these kind of things might happen because you've taken a step back to ask that question. One of the things I do right now is called the QRAP method. And this is something that Muna, my co-founder, helped us like we developed together. And the Q part is the question formulation technique. And the reason why it is so important is that we find that if you ask the right questions, the answers reveal themselves, right? So if there's something that is a challenge that can't seem movable, maybe we're not asking the right questions about it. So, for example, a friend of mine used to say, when I told him I was tired all the time and, I've got too much on my plate. And he was like, and, when do you sleep? And I was like, oh, I've got too much to do to sleep. And he said, maybe you've got too much not to sleep.
Mm. Just
You know,
reframing the question.
reframe it, reframe it. How can I look at it slightly differently to make the priority the one that will actually serve me better? And it's not saying it's easy to do. Sometimes it takes a while, and it takes a journey to be able to change habits, change routines, etc. But there is often a way to look at things differently, to act differently, to do something differently, which will have completely different results. Because if you keep doing the same thing, you'll keep having the same outcome.
So you touched up on the QREP based methods, and you also run workshops around that. Could you just maybe touch up on what that entails and what people can expect when they connect with you guys?
Yeah, so we've got a formula now, and I think it's just been the greatest step to building the business is that we have something that works no matter what the challenge. So what it would look like is, let's say, for example, you were to come to me, Prosper, and say, oh, I need a coach to work with my team, work with my company, whatever. We're experiencing high turnover. People are getting stressed, they're leaving, and I don't know why. Our teams are faltering. We used to have great percentage in terms of performance. Now everything's dropping. I'm not sure what's going on. You might have seen symptoms of there being a problem. So you'd come to me and say, this is what I think the problem is. Similar to going to your GP, right? I'm experiencing this and I'm not sure what's wrong. So it would start with us having a bit of a questionnaire. So we'd ask you questions which are in and around the topics as well, because there might be other things attached to it that you might not have noticed. And then we'll get a better understanding of like a diagnostic of what's happening within your company. From then, we'll take 2 or 3 of those core issues and we'll plug that into our QRAP method, which is the question formulation technique, reflect, action, and protection, right? So then we put it into there. We'll take you through, depending on if it's, usually we start with like a 1 hour workshop, really simple thing to give you just the ideas. And from it, you could take away hypothetically and implement it yourself, right? It gives you an idea of the QRAP method overall, how it works, etc. But some people need more in-depth support than that. So we'll either have a done with you version where we would basically consult and say, you've got your HR team, you've got your L&D team, we will support them in delivering this over the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months. Or we have the done for you method where we will be the people delivering it for your team. So for example, we're working with LSBU right now, London South Bank Uni. So there's a lot of people who are doing the chiropractic, we're doing pediatricians, we've got nursing, we've got all these students who are feeling stressed, but so are the teachers, the lecturers, right? So we're having a situation where, the turnover is starting to increase. And so now we're stepping in to support that whole process with our method. And then we can track it afterwards to see, okay, cool, you came in and it was about 60 something percent. Now it's dropped down to 30%. It's working, So then that's how we would work with people. Started off being corporate, but recently now we've also included health and education. So that is what the process looks like at the moment. And that's just one of them. It really depends on what the challenge is, whether you need workshops, coaching, talks, or maybe even events. So we do retreats, we can come up and do wellness days, that kind of thing. But it really depends on the budget and what the need is. But I quite like to do more creative approaches to solving problems. So some of the stuff might seem woo-woo. Like one of my favorite ones I did, we had a company in central London. I can't necessarily say the name, but they had a challenge with their team. Like, they find that the performance was just dropping exponentially, right? They weren't necessarily having high turnover, but the performance was low, which is another indication that there's a challenge, right? Someone who used to be a high flyer is now at 50% of their usual capacity. What's going wrong? We, after a while, decided to implement an Afrofit class during their lunch times, right? And it sounds so random, but what it did was, especially for the people who didn't like the gym, who didn't necessarily go on walks, but we got something which was just half an hour and got them using the music they like. Sometimes we had soca, we had all that kind of stuff, raised their energy levels through the roof. And you found that their productivity went through the roof as a result of that. And it was something they were waiting for, you know. And it wasn't necessarily a sit down one-to-one with their leadership conversation, which also would have been another approach. But I try and look at more creative ways that make things fun. Because one of the things I've noticed is as we grow older, fun, joy is something that ends up falling off our priority list. We start to look at what's the function. We need to pay, money after me, right? We got to keep the roof over our heads. We got to keep the business running. And then everything gets so serious that there's nothing that actually brings our energy up. We stop taking our trips. And when we do, we're still thinking about work. We stop spending our time with our friends because, kids, all these responsibilities start to grow. And so I try and find ways. I used to have this program called the Joyful Executive, and that was completely dedicated to that. How can we bring joy back into the executive life as a tool against burnout? So yeah, long story short, there's a lot of things we do, but the main thing is the Breathe workshop, which uses the QRAP method.
Absolutely. And thank you so much. And for those that are watching or listening right now, if you've ever felt maybe your world is spinning too fast, let us know in the comments below. Maybe you had that moment where you're like, oh my God, stop this. I want to get off this bus. Hey, we see you. And Andre, obviously you've got the tools, you've got the systems, the processes and things of that nature. How would people even begin to start feeling calm? I watched a show. I think it's called Black Books, and the guy was just looking for a little book of calm, and he actually ended up choking on it because he was so dependent on it so much. Right now, where would people go, and where would people go on the internet and actually maybe start looking at what it is that you guys can offer or connect with you guys?
I mean, you could come to us. I mean, we're rebranding at the moment, so I think maybe afterwards I can send you the email. But it's my page is Your Burnout Coach online. That's where people can get in touch with me specifically. But we have what we call udahealthteam.com. So that is more of the education and health side of things. But there's lots of resources that you can get. There's Calm, like you mentioned. There is there's lots of free service as well, even on the NHS, where you just have to wait a lot longer to get it. One thing I would say though is regulation techniques. If there's one thing that you can take away is, can you self-regulate? So when things are getting too much, when things are getting stressed, when you feel your heart rate racing, when you feel your sweat, when you feel yourself breathing quickly, can you bring yourself back to calm? As a question. And I would encourage you to think of the times when you are in panic state, that you find yourself back in settled state. Ask yourself, what did I do? Be conscious of that. Because there are certain things you're naturally going to be doing. Your body is wired for this. You're naturally going to be doing things to calm yourself down that we just don't think about. We just don't pay attention to. One of the examples might be how you breathe. Right. So I heard someone say that one of the reasons why people go to smoking is not just because of the nicotine, it's because you take deep, short, long breaths. And if you imagine without the nicotine, without the cigarette, you can do that at any point. One of the things I used to do is in the moment, because sometimes we think, oh, I don't have time for this. Everyone has time for 5 seconds. Everyone has 15 seconds at some point. And I used to do this when I'm in a meeting, for example, or if I've got a deadline coming up, I'll sit at my desk, I'll close my eyes, and I'll do what we call box breathing. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds out, 4 seconds hold. I do maybe 3 or 4 of those. It takes about 15 seconds, 20 seconds maybe, and bring my heart rate down. Because what ends up happening is, again, masterclass thing, when we start to panic, we get into our fight or flight, which is basically when we start to think to ourselves, danger, we are in trouble, something is going wrong. And it's there for a purpose. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's there for a purpose. And what it does is it shifts energy so that we can do something, right? But the problem is when that thing finishes and we're still in our fight or flight mode. And often, especially if you're in a role that requires you to think, then it means you could be in fight or flight for the last 3 years. So when you're in that state and you can feel yourself going past that rate, we need to get into what we call rest and digest, which is our calm state. And that's your nervous system reset, basically. So breathing can do that. Going for a walk can do that. Physical exercise, anything that connects your body with your mind and your emotions are ways to do that. Laughing, crying, one of a friends of mine was really under stress, and she's like, "Oh, I just feel like I need to cry." And I was like, "Why don't you?" And then she was like, "Well, it's not going to fix anything." And I was like, "Well, not crying is only going to make it worse." Like holding it in. I used to have this idea when I was a kid, the fizzy bottle principle. Yeah. Every time something happens, it's like shaking a fizzy bottle. At some point, it's going to explode, and it's going to explode in a way that is completely inconvenient. And it's going to be around the people who are holding the bottle, the people who are closest to you. And so if you don't want that to happen, release some of that pressure. Cry if you need to, go for a walk if you need to, laugh if you need to. All these things are actual tools that can help you to process your emotions so that you can deal with the stress to avoid reaching the point of burnout.
I love that. I have this, I don't know if it works for anybody else, but anytime, either when I'm driving or I'm talking or whatever it is, I actually check in with my tummy muscles. And if they're tense,
Yes.
just release them. And that just releases just about everything else. And then it's just a nice check-in that I do, even at the traffic lights. Whenever I arrive at traffic lights, I'm like, okay, we're here now. Where's my tummy? And I'm like, okay, we were not relaxed. Why were we tensing? And it just works out perfectly. Now, Andre,
I have to add this one just because it's so, what you just said there. I just want to make sure that people understand what you just said, because one is awareness, right? You're paying attention. And when you're stressed, your body gets tense, because if you imagine if we're out in the wild or whatever, it's because you're ready to run, you're ready to do something. I'll give you a simple example right now of what you just said. Relax your shoulders. Usually, you don't even realize that you've been walking around like this, right? The tension is in your shoulders. Relax your jaw. Let your eyebrows rest, right? One of the things I do before I go to bed is like a gradual relaxation technique where I go from head to toe, just relax, 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 relax. And then in that moment, I realize how much tension I have been holding in my body all day. So I had to get to a stage where I did it more regularly than just before bed, because when you hold tension for a long period of time, it is not good for your body. That's when you start getting chronic illnesses, you start getting the headaches, you start getting all these back pains, things like that. It's because your body is in this tense mode, ready to fight constantly without having any relaxation. Like one of the things, just the last thing I'll say to you is we as a people need to stop rewarding ourselves when we climb up mountains with another mountain to climb. Instead of celebrating the fact that we climbed a mountain, our reward is another mountain. And I think that is one of the dangerous things. We need to start having actual peace and rest. Go on a holiday instead. I had this one client. She achieved something incredible, got an award for all this kind of stuff, and she's like, "Yeah, but I need to get the next one." I said, "What?
Ooh,
Take a moment first. Have a moment. Actually acknowledge it. Because if you didn't get it, for the next 3 months you would have been beating yourself up. So how about the next 3 months you build yourself up? Celebrate yourself."
absolutely. Well, we should celebrate ourselves. I think we just created a remarkable episode here. I mean, for real, for real. But I mean, obviously, we've figured out where you've been, what it is that you're working on. But what's next? Now that we're in your world, what are we excited about that you're creating that we can jump on board with you with?
I think this next season is about growth, and I'm really excited about this. Like I said, I brought on a co-founder, so we're working together to serve within the education and health industry sectors, and we have now also expanded the team. So we have those who are working on sales and acquisition, etc., as well, which allows us to do more of the thinking stage and to develop a lot more of our offering. So right now, most of the stuff we do is in person or online, but we are going to be building a platform as well to allow people to have access to some of these resources, a lot of these techniques, without necessarily having to book us to come in. But that's going to be over the next few years. And the final thing is what a relief. My personal framework is the relief framework. So I'll be releasing a podcast in end of 2025, early 2026. So I'll be in your shoes, Prosper, to interview people who are these managers, who are these CEOs, who are these decision makers who affect the organizational stress, who are these experts like me or other psychotherapists who have seen what works in that corporate environment. And I'm going to be speaking to all of them about what works and what doesn't, what's missing. So be excited about that. So that's how you can keep in touch with me.
Absolutely. Well, now I've got my ears pierced for that one there. Definitely, definitely. Now, I can't thank you enough for the time that you spent with us on the call today. I mean, your life story and your experience and what it is that you're helping other people be, do, and have is quite remarkable. So many of us are just walking around and don't even know that the very thing we're looking for externally is right inside of us. And it could just start
100%.
like one breath or just loosening your muscles like we've just established.
It is. I think once you realize how simple a lot of things is, and I'm not to say that every problem is going to disappear because it's not one of those things. But I always say that there's two things that are affecting you at any one time: the stressors and the stresses. The stressors are the things that are external, the environmental situation, the deadlines, etc. But the stresses is in how your body feels, how you, going back to what we said at the beginning, how you deal with the things that happen to you. That is something you can control. You know, if someone says something to you, maybe they're going through something. Maybe it has nothing to do with you at all. Maybe they're the ones who need help and support. Being able to reframe all of that is something that I found is so, it has changed the game for me. Assume positive intent, appreciative inquiry. Look at what you've done already that's worked and keep doing that. Make sure you're in charge of your own mind, your thoughts, your emotions, your actions, and then let go of the result. Allow God to do his work, at the end of that, and see where we are, see what changes can be made.
Absolutely. And there you have it, folks. Andre Bright himself, the architect of clarity. I think this is what you're doing, the dancer of resilience. I think this is where you're at now. And your trusted guide out of burnout. So many of us are just really wondering generalities out there, not knowing what or where or how to self regulate. And I hope you felt like you literally were walking the path with him, maybe facing your fears, finding your strength, and also discovering what it means to be truly alive in your work and life. So if this actually resonated with you, I encourage you to stick around, because in the next episode, from what I hear, we're going to be exploring ideas on how to live a happier existence, and also real practical strategies to bring joy, balance into your everyday. And maybe before you go, I encourage you to share this episode with somebody who is shouldering too much and maybe has
Mm.
forgotten who they are. Could be your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, anyone that feels like they have the world on their shoulders. Just tell them, hey, Andre says, relax. Okay. And if somebody has brought you here, the next time you see them, just give them a hug. And while you're at it, just hit subscribe so you don't miss out on any of these fascinating episodes on the Online Prosperity Show, the place where you find real transformation, one story at a time. Now, Andre, thank you so much for your insights. And to those that are watching and listening, as you have figured out, you're not alone. You're becoming, and you are always welcome here. Bye for now.